Thank you. Can you hear me okay? Thank you so much for inviting me for this very special symposium to launch the new Center for Contemplative Studies. I would also like to thank Dr. Yuki Imoto and Eriko Tsumori and organization committee at Keio University. So this talk has two parts to address what I call lonely society and how Japan has been the leading nation in leading nation in loneliness, and then discuss the implication of Japanese Naikan practice for contemplative education. And if there is anywhere I can shift the microphone, can you still hear me okay? このまま立って読みたいんですけど。So I would like to actually start with two questions. What is loneliness? And and is loneliness just a problem for individuals or for the entire society? My most recent book, The Anatomy of Loneliness, brings together ethnographic findings from 3 research projects, all of which point to the importance of understanding loneliness. More than a decade ago, I started an ethnographic research project on internet group suicide in Japan. Initially, I thought I was going to write a book on suicide and not loneliness. I wanted to understand why young people were meeting each other online, discussing suicide, and then meeting in person to commit group suicide. I spent several years visiting suicide websites and chat rooms, communicating with the moderators of such websites, and talking to people involved in suicide prevention in Japan, both in the non-profit sector and in government. I wrote a few articles on this topic. The title of one of them was taken from a suicide note that was taken and left by a female Japanese suicide website visitor who committed suicide with people she met online, who said she was, quote, "I am too lonely to die alone." So I came to realize that suicide is a manifestation and a symptom. It is a symptom of something. And I came to realize that deep underlying cause of suicide, at least for these young Japanese who are regularly visiting suicide websites, was nothing but loneliness. So loneliness was one of the main themes that emerged from this project. Another was lacking meaning in life or ikigai. These findings led me to wonder whether the themes I found among young suicide website visitors would turn up in the narratives of so-called ordinary Japanese college students who were of a similar age, but who were not active on suicide website. For this second project, I interviewed dozens of Japanese college-age students to explore their views on suicide, loneliness, and meaning in life. Here, some of the key themes to emerge were loneliness and a strong wish to feel needed by others. Both of these were connected to the concept of meaning in life. While doing my research, the 33311 disasters of earthquake, tsunami, and a nuclear meltdown struck Japan in 2011, known more commonly around the world by the place name Fukushima. I traveled to some of the affected areas to see how the disaster has affected the communities there. So there I experienced and witnessed how an entire community, not just individuals, can experience loneliness. So as many of us know, loneliness has now become a major issue of concern worldwide. In the US, more than a third of Americans over the age of 45 reported feeling lonely in 2010. Former US Surgeon General Vivek Murthy pointed out that loneliness and social isolation are associated with a reduction in lifespan similar to that caused by smoking 15 cigarettes a day. Chronic loneliness is also associated with changes in gene expression that make the body more susceptible to illness, such as increased expression of pro-inflammatory genes and decreased expression of antiviral genes. So while loneliness is often understood as the problem of solitary individual, it is increasingly now seen as an issue of social concern and even one of the public health concerns. In fact, the former British Prime Minister, Theresa May, said, "Loneliness is one of the greatest public health challenges of our time." And she appointed the very first Minister for Loneliness in the UK, Tracy Crouch. As you see in this chart, in Japan, more than 1/3, even close to 50% of people in certain age groups report that they experience loneliness. This chart shows that Japan has much higher ratio of people who have no communication besides family members in comparison with the US and in the UK. It's quite a staggering gap between how Japanese feel about, as opposed to people in the UK and in the US. This one, sorry for the small letter, but this is a response to a question. To what extent do you agree or disagree that your local community has become more supportive? To this question, the result is quite concerning. As you can see, only 10% of Japanese responded that their local community has become more supportive. This is amazingly low in comparison with other countries. It shows how people feel they have no support to rely on. This is an extremely lonely experience. So what is loneliness then? Probably the first definition, perceived social isolation, is one of the best known and highly regarded definition of loneliness that was made by John Cacioppo, the leading researcher on suicide. Because many people tend to think that loneliness means being alone, physically alone. But being alone and feeling alone are not the same thing. One can be alone much of the time, yet not feel lonely. And one can be surrounded by people, yet still feel lonely. So loneliness is a rather subjective state and a matter of a perceived lack. So therefore, this perceived social isolation is capturing the essence of loneliness very well. But after my own research on suicide, interviewing college students and visiting 311 stricken areas, I came to realize actually affect, feeling is very crucial to loneliness. So therefore, I define loneliness as a perceived and felt social isolation. Loneliness is a feeling, an affective and subjective state of being. We can feel loneliness before we can even know we are lonely. We often hear that the body has its own mind. Loneliness is a feeling and not just a cognitive state. So, and thirdly, just as feeling at home is connected to a sense of belonging and wellness, belonging and a connection can mean feeling connected not just to people, but also to places and environments. Our sense of belonging includes not just people, but also environments. So therefore, I also came up with this third definition. Loneliness is also feelings of dissatisfaction that arise with regard to relationships to others or to the environment. The role the physical environment plays in experiences of belonging and loneliness has largely been ignored in the study of loneliness, despite its being very common experience. So here, let me actually read out some of the narratives that were posted on so-called suicide website or jisatsu site. So I studied over 40 most commonly visited jisatsu sites, suicide websites, over 7 years, and collected posted narratives. So one person posted this. I became like a dead presence at school. I'm just like a shadow. Am I always going to live alone like a shadow and die like a shadow? Someone, please love me. I am lonely. Another person posted this. My dependency got worse as I started to participate in chat rooms. I feel anxious when I'm alone. I cannot leave the computer even for a second. I feel anxious that I'm not needed by anyone. Just being told that I'm necessary would be enough. I would have some peace of mind. I will do anything asked of me so as not to be disliked. I am lonely. I cannot live alone. I want to be strong. To be honest, I'm becoming unsure of what I'm living for. Since I cannot believe in true love, I seek just the words. I want to be loved and needed. So this interview was for some time ago. Nowadays, instead of cannot leave the computer, it's kind of cannot like let go of your iPhone. Maybe that would be the equivalence. And then now moving to some of the narratives I heard through my interviews with college students. This is what a student told me. I have surely felt at times that I had no place to belong to. 居場所がない. My source of belonging was my best friend, the one who took care of me so much during the tough period I was going through. Even now, I don't feel belonging at home. School, well, it depends on who I am with. When I'm with my closest friend, with whom I can be myself and be vulnerable, then I feel like school is where I belong to. So to me, it's school and not home, which feels more like the place where I belong. So is loneliness an individual problem the way these images depict? If you type a word loneliness on the Google, oftentimes you'll see images like this, literally a person sitting alone. Or is loneliness a social issue? In my book, I use the phrase, the lonely society. The phrase is intentionally paradoxical. Society means people being together and living together and engaging socially. To be in society means to not be alone, but it doesn't mean that one does not feel alone. There are certain conditions of the lonely society in my mind. So I'll get to that later, and then let me go back to some of college students' narratives. So one student told me, quote, I do have a strong wish to be of help to others. After all, being needed by others is purpose in life and meaning in life, isn't it? When I heard this person telling me, I was actually surprised because that was maybe not how I used to think about. But I kept hearing from other college students of the similar remark. So another person even told me this. I think purpose in life is very important, and the people around me and my purpose in life, helping others and being helped by others, is so important. Purpose in life, I have not thought about that so much, but there are things I need to do, and there are things that I would like to do. Also, being needed is quite important. Another person said, well, it is incredibly important to be needed by others. To me, if I'm no longer needed by anyone, there is no meaning in life or reason to keep on living. I wonder what my purpose in life is. Perhaps my family and my friends? Having someone who is dear to me, something that is small and trivial, might be the most important thing. I don't need anything too special. And another student told me this, quote, well, it is not anything special, but I would like to be of service to others. Something small like listening to my friends' troubles or doing some helpful things for them. So, what do I mean by the lonely society? I think there are 3 important conditions for us to consider. My research dealt with not just the loneliness of a single person or a few people, but the loneliness of a society. That is, a type of society that makes people feel uncared for, unseen, and unimportant, the lonely society. The first condition is probably what most of us think about lonely society if you hear such a term, meaning there are many lonely people running around in a society. And this is probably what some have called the loneliness epidemics. But there is more to the structure of lonely society. The second condition is where the people in the society do not feel taken care of and cared for by society as a whole, and where the structure of society promotes a sense of loneliness rather than one of belonging and connection. Sadly, I feel Japan really fits this second condition. Japan has been a society known for its lifetime employment, something very distinctive about the Japanese economic structure. But then, as we all know, that crumbled down, and the so-called neoliberal shift changed these structures. So there are many people who are feeling they are not cared for by their company or by the society, by the government. So therefore, in many ways, Japan has been so-called advanced lonely society. And the third condition is a society or community that is lonely as a unit. So in that, it is not closely connected to other societies and to humankind as a whole, or feeling abandoned, neglected, marginalized, or disenfranchised. Of course, refugees would make the most obvious sense who fit this third condition. When I was visiting the North Ibaraki Prefecture, I realized some of the communities were experiencing this incredible loneliness of being neglected and being invisible to other people, because not many people were aware that Ibaraki was also heavily impacted by 3/11 tsunami and earthquake. So in terms of that, the method I applied for my study, I intentionally used this triangulation, meaning I triangulated different accounts, first-person account, second-person account, and third-person account. So the first-person account is the most experienced near. Why? It's because first-person account is how people talk about their own experience. This is how I feel. This is my life. So what I just shared with you, how college people talked about their experiences and how people who visit suicide websites posted their experience are good examples of first-person account. The second-person account is someone else depict or talk about the subjective experience of the person through empathy and imagination. Therefore, films, novels, art, cultural histories are good examples. Oftentimes, filmmakers, writers are often sending their social commentaries through these media, and then there have been many movies on loneliness and suicide. Oftentimes, the depiction is not very hostile to people who are going through suicidal experience, but rather with the attempt to understand with empathy and imagination. So the third-person account is the polar opposite of the first-person account. Therefore, this is the most experienced far. Statistical report, typical newspaper reports, government's report, and academic work are good examples. The aim is I can never get this objectification, and then not interested in the subjectivity and subjective experience of people. So I thought just triangulating and juxtaposing these three different kind of account would yield in a deeper understanding of loneliness and suicide. So in terms of what can we learn from loneliness? First, we need to focus on loneliness as the problem of a society, not the problem of individuals. We also need to promote values within society that focus on intrinsic rather than instrumental value. So probably in terms of intrinsic value, I always think about Billy Joel's song, Just the Way You Are. Or if you grew up with Mr. Rogers, you are lovable just the way you are, just the way you are. The fact you exist in this world, that's good enough. You are valuable. That's the kind of intrinsic value. Instrumental value are opposite of that, relying on the productivity, that kind of thing. So we also need to promote relational and person-oriented meaning in life, which is being meaningful to others and finding others meaningful to oneself, rather than goal-oriented meaning, such as attaining objectives and personal goals. So the third one, this fourth one is more to do with a system, but we need to support and establish affordances for individuals and communities that feel marginalized and do not have a niche. Finally, it is important to explore empathy in society, both towards individuals and towards communities, and promoting critical empathy in scholarship. In terms of the possible solutions, I'm sure there are many potential solutions, but these were some things I have at least come up with based on my research. I think, first of all, it's very important to accept loneliness. Once we understand loneliness, we come to realize loneliness is everyone's business. No one can escape from loneliness. Loneliness, indeed, is part of our common humanity. So don't pathologize loneliness as if only some people experience loneliness and not others. It is universal. As my dear friend, colleague, Dr. Rob Rosser said about the universality of suffering, loneliness is the same. There is a universality of loneliness. It's just part of being a human being, and even mammals, animals experience that. So also, loneliness is a temporary experience. Feelings come and go, and they are not going to stay forever. So, and thus accepting this temporary experience of loneliness may be key to resilience. Accept others is also very important in my mind. So even though cultivating empathy towards others may be ideal, accepting others can be a first step. Individuals and even entire communities, especially those at risk of marginalization, need to feel accepted, need to be seen and recognized as as a worthwhile, and need to be cared for, rather than looking down on such people and such communities, as happened to young people who committed suicide in Japan. we can support such individuals and communities by recognizing and accepting their subjective experiences as legitimate. Some of you may remember when the internet group Suicide or Net Shinju suddenly was on the newspaper every day. It was amazing that how so much mass media's report had this negative tone. These young people do not even know the weight of life. They treat life just as like a virtual game. They are so callous. So I was actually very surprised by the lack of empathy towards people who are attracted to internet group suicide. So third, accept oneself, accept ourselves. It is so common for our sense of self-worth and self-esteem to be highly dependent on other people's relations with other people. So we saw that from both college students' narratives and posted narratives on suicide website that I have shared with you today. So many young people in Japan emphasize how important to be needed by others. And some people even told me that there is no point of keep on living if they are not needed by anyone. But this is also dangerous to be overly dependent on others' judgment and appraisal of you. For this reason, it is crucial to cultivate a sense of self-worth that is at least in part independent of other people's approval. I think even for adults who are not like young college students, it's a challenging one because we oftentimes rely on how other people perceive you, how other people evaluate and value you as a way of having our own self-worth. But sometimes we might not get that. What do we do? So we also need to have some kind of somewhat independent self-worth that is not too depending on other people. And in this finding one's ibasho, I think it's actually also very important. As I said earlier, people have a relationship with places and environment, not just with people. Actually, when people are experiencing severe loneliness, such as being even suicidal, and people who are experiencing hikikomori or social withdrawal, it is not easy to connect with people. So the hurdle is too high. But then people can still find a certain place or places. It could even be a favorite swing in a park nearby, or the public library where no one knows you, but you just like the space in a library. I like to be surrounded with books, so I always liked library. So find ibasho first, and that may be simpler and easier. You may even find people who share similar interests in a community or a place. And finally, building a system of acceptance is important, as loneliness is not just an individual problem, but also a social problem. Ultimately, our society needs to change with its priority and values. Thank again, Rob. You already talked a lot about it, so I don't need to say too much, but instead of chasing a kind of success that is based on productivity, a form of instrumental value over intrinsic value, it would be crucial to recognize the intrinsic value through promoting empathy and compassion, and accepting marginalized people and creating a niche for them. Because one day, even some of us who are quote-unquote successful, the day of being productive will end. We age, we become sick, so it's not other people's problem. It would all happen to us. So if you are just placing the worth based on productivity, you're not kind to other people because that's how you judge others, but that's how you judge yourself. So therefore, not much acceptance. So I think education is quite key here, but that's more to do. So now let me move to part 2, contemplative education and loneliness prevention. So if loneliness is caused by a lack of felt belonging, acceptance, and connection, can an education that fosters felt belonging, acceptance, and connection serve as a preventative measure? And can it make our future society less lonely? So here, I would like to talk about Japanese Naikan as a form of contemplative education. So here, unlike my usual presentation time, many people understand kanji. So as you can see, Naikan literally means inside looking. So it's introspection. So Naikan is a discursive and analytical method of structured self-reflection that helps people gain new insights to themselves, their relationships, and the causes of problems. Naikan was developed by the lay Buddhist practitioner Yoshimoto Isshin in 1941. He adapted it from Mishirabe, a practice of the Japanese Mahayana Buddhist school of Jodo Shinshu. In terms of Naikan settings, probably the most common places where you can experience Naikan, if you're at all interested in, would be at the Naikan Kenshusho or Naikan centers, which are usually the houses of a practitioner. But Naikan is also conducted at hospitals as part of psychotherapy, especially for addictions. Naikan has been known to be very effective for addiction. Temples, prisons, juvenile detention centers, and even school classrooms offer Naikan. And then probably what is most distinctive about this Naikan practice is its recollection of the past from others' perspectives. Even when you have a chance to recollect your past experiences, oftentimes what we tend to do is from the I-centered perspectives. I am a Chikako. My family is this way. These are my friends. So that's just the way how our ordinary mind works. But during Naikan, Naikan has a particular structure to really push people to recollect the past events in a relational context. So you have to put yourself in somebody's shoes. So clients are asked to remember and recall their past year by year from early childhood to the present. Every 2 hours, they are visited by the practitioner for a mensets interview, during which they report to their self-examination thus far. This recollection must take place along prescribed lines. Clients choose a significant person in their life, usually starting with their mother. Then they record their past in relation to that person along Naikan's 3 themes. Of course, if you have very traumatic experience with your mother, you'll choose who you consider as a primary caregiver when you are a child. So Naikan's 3 questions are pretty simple. First question is, what have I received from this person? してもらったこと. Second question is, what have I given back to the person? して返したこと. So it's almost like receiving and returning. It's kind of reciprocity. The third question is, to many Naikan facilitators, is essence of Naikan. What troubles and difficulties have I caused this person? Many people often ask me, what about the question 4? What trouble other people caused us? But the Naikan Center often respond to you like, you don't need to come to Naikan Center and spend a week spending 16 hours a day behind the screen space, because we are experts. We never forget troubles and harms caused by others. It's actually very known in neuroscience that we have this negative bias. So we are really good at remembering negativities, but not good at remembering actually kindness we receive from others. So Naikan elicits both positive and negative emotions, unlike mindfulness practice and other contemplative practices. So this is like a typical Nikon room. So oftentimes this paper screen creates 3 feet by 3 feet space. So that's probably good for most Japanese, unless you are really tall and large. And this is a Nikon facilitator just coming to visit for a regular menses interview. So these are pictures of a facilitator showing respect to Nikon client. And as Nikon is practiced outside of Japan, so the left is a picture of a Nikon space at the Nikon Center in Austria. So as you see, it's quite a bit bigger, and this was actually one of the very first things Brendan, the other Ozawa de Silva. Sorry, I mean, there are two Ozawa de Silvas today, so you can just go B Ozawa de Silva and C Ozawa de Silva. As this was the beginning of our honeymoon, so he still has the grudge talking about forgiveness. Like, my anthropologist wife took me to a Nikon center, and he happened to speak German, so he was encouraged. Oh, you can start a Nikon. You just sit here. I still remember like his like frozen smile. Anyway, so. And let me read out some of the insights clients gained after their 1 week Nikon. This woman said this: I always blame my mother for being the source of my anxiety neurosis. After my Nikon, I realized that I always received an infinite amount of love from her. It wasn't because of her, but rather because I only paid attention to the things she didn't do and grew in anger and dissatisfaction. That, as a result, I built up stress by myself and became sick. Thanks to Nikon, I gained security, and since I am certain of the affection I have received now, I think I can finally live in the present. Second case, this was more of a severe case because this woman lost her mother as her father killed her in front of her. But anyway, this is what she said after her 1 week Nikon. I feel so grateful that I can see myself from the perspective of my father. It was not my father's problem that I hated him, but mine. My father was I, and I was he. We had the same heart. I accept the fact that my father killed my mother, but as long as I have this memory of being loved by him, I will not hate him anymore. It was not his problem. It was my problem to hate him. It took me 9 years, but I am all right. Thank you very much. So this third narrative comes from a student of ours when Brendan, the other Ozawa de Silva, and I, with other people, used to visit this maximum security prison for women in Georgia. It's a prison, it's not the Nikon Center, but this student spent 100 hours in her spare time to do Nikon, and eventually she extended that to 200 hours of Nikon. So this is what she said. From the ages of 7 to 19, I was sexually and physically abused by the dope man with my mother's consent. At 19, it finally ended. I took my mother's life and lost mine to the system. The story of my mother's struggle, heartache, and loneliness is indeed a very sad one, especially since I am just now looking at it from her perspective. All of these things opened my heart, my eyes, and my memory, giving me a chance to reflect not only on the horrific things that happened to me, but also on the fact that I was well fed and clothed, and that my mom had issues that she obviously felt were bigger than she was. Forgiveness for my mom is coming with me, being able to feel compassion for her and for how she must have felt and why. I decided that unforgiveness was like slowly committing suicide, and I'm not ready to die. My continued healing process comes by way of forgiveness, which the Naikan practice has been a roadmap in helping me get there. Another thing is after 1 week Naikan, many people actually become very creative. Many people leave Naikan Center by composing poem, painting or drawing beautiful arts. Somehow it didn't happen to me. I was a little bit too mundane, even though I thought I gained precious insight. So this is a mandala made by a client at the Yanagita's Meisō no Mori Naikan Center. The central Buddha-like figure represents the client, and the inner circle in orange, if you can read Japanese, you see mom, dad, grandfather, grandmother, so families and friends. And the next circles are friends, and it goes on and on. Like people they know casually, and even people, strangers, but they clearly have been part of helping how we are living and being healthy. So there are, in my mind, 3 major outcomes of Naikan regarding positive mental well-being. Many people leave Naikan Center with the greater sense of gratitude. Not surprising, because people spend 1 week remembering kindness they receive from others. And there's a sense of accepting oneself and others for who they are. And there's a sense of connectedness with others. So these actually 3 are very closely related to the main categories of positive mental health. One is emotional well-being, feeling happy. Psychological well-being is kind of almost self-acceptance, positive self-esteem, you like who you are. And social well-being, which is a social acceptance. As we know, if we are more accepting and tolerable of other people, we tend to be a happier people, rather than being pissed and angry at people. So this shows actually the study with me and Brendan and our colleague conducted on Naikan. So the blue shows right before Naikan, the red is immediately after Naikan, and the green is 3 months after Naikan. What is interesting here is on both social and psychological well-being, you see the increasing, actually continuous increase on these 2, because social and psychological well-being is more to do with cognition and perception. It's a shifting one's cognition. Emotional well-being is kind of feeling very happy, which happened to many Naikan people, including myself. I was just so happy. Nothing was able to bother me. So in Tokyo, people will cut the line and get the train ticket. And I was like, of course, you're in a hurry. Go ahead. I'm okay. But that seems to me like a euphoric happiness maybe lasted about a month, and that gradually died down. So that's kind of what you're seeing. But shifting cognition seems to be a very stable, long-lasting. So here, what is contemplative education? As Dr. Rosser already explained a lot, I'll keep it short. Contemplative education seeks to bring about transformative insights in students that alter their orientation to themselves, others, and the world. While standard education answers what questions about the world, contemplative education addresses who questions about the students themselves. Who am I? Who are we to each other? Previously, contemplative education was only for the religious. Now we see it doesn't have to be religious, and it can exist in harmony with existing academic approaches and science. Eleanor Duckworth, a student of John Piaget and a professor of Harvard School of Education, spoke of uncovering the curriculum instead of covering the curriculum. Rather than covering just facts and inquiry about the world, we include inquiry and facts about ourselves, students' own lives, sense of meaning and purpose. Here, elements of NICAN have been integrated into the C learning program at Emory. Emory's University's Contemplative education program has already incorporated this aspect. So in one lesson, students consider all the acts of kindness that are necessary to raise an infant to the age of a school-age child. NICAN result in long-term cognitive shifts in understanding that contribute to mental stability and flourishing, not just short-term benefits of feeling good. NICAN requires serious ethical reflection about reciprocity. How much have I received and how much have I gained back? Thus, NICAN is a form of contemplative moral education. So contemplative education doesn't have to be limited to simply quieting the mind and settling down, but rather, studies suggest that social connectedness and a sense of belonging are crucial and fundamental for positive mental well-being. Looking at things from others' perspectives challenges our self-centered views and can be uncomfortable. So are we ready to analytical practices that will elicit not just positive affect, but also negative affect, facing one's faults, taking responsibility for harm we caused, for ethical development? How can this be done safely and in a developmentally appropriate way? So this is a final slide. So establishing safety and belonging through joint activities, group intentions, and mindful dialogue. Depathologize loneliness, recognizing it as a common struggle we all face. Changing norms around the perfectionism and failure. Cultivating gratitude for ourselves and each other as members of a shared interdependent community. Finally, communicating and demonstrating to students that they have inherent value, not just instrumental value. Academic and work success is only one small aspect of our identity. Thank you so much.
Good afternoon, everyone. I am Miho Takahashi from Clinical Psychology Graduate School of Education of Tokyo University. How many minutes do I have? 15 minutes? Okay, thank you. It's a very intensive lecture. I have a lot of thoughts arising, but I'd like to use the presentation I prepared. So myself and Professor Ozawa, we met for the first time today face-to-face. However, the NICAN connected us online, and we were discussing NICAN online. So NICAN is really expanding our community. So I'd like to first talk about my position. I belong to clinical psychology course, so-called I provide counseling. So I provide consultation service as therapist. There are many consultations provided in clinical psychology, but I mainly target people who are working, but people who want to work but unable to work. Honestly, frankly speaking, those who were forced to leave the company. And many times I provide consultation service to those people.
I provide. So I belong to a university too. while I'm providing the clinical consulting, and that's developing into my research, individual research. And then as a result of research, I teach students. So I brought up the student who become a psychologist or a therapist. In addition to that, let me explain where I'm coming from. So I don't know how much you know about clinical psychology. So there is a kind of more than 400 kinds of therapies. It's kind of strange world. So some of the therapists say, I provide this kind of therapy, this and this. So, for example, some people use mindfulness as part of the behavioral cognitive therapies. So I myself doesn't have any intention to put a signboard to call my therapy to some school, because I don't care about that. All important is to serve the people in front of me. So I'm not the kind of person who particularly interested in certain kinds of therapy. So I don't say I provide this type of therapy, but there is something I put more importance. That is way of thinking, how to see things is more important than a school of therapy. So what I mean by that is, psychology or counseling, we deal with, pay attention to individuals' inner world distress. Of course, I think it's important, but not only that, what's more important is connection between environment or society. And in the touch point between society and environment, people have a distress. So that's my kind of point of view. So when I want to kind of, so not only talking about their problem, I support people to support them to change their environment. That is something I pay attention to. The other approach, the other thing I focus on is Oriental approach. Just like Ozawa, Professor Ozawa talk, like Naikan and mindful, those are the things I'm interested in. But I don't care about how you call it, whether it's called mindful, whether it's called Naikan, I don't care. Because there's something more important as an essence there. I pay attention to that. That's what I'm most interested in. So contemplative learning, contemplative kind of education has something common with those Naikan and mindfulness. That's why I'm interested in contemplative education. So time is limited, so let me move forward. From the standpoint of clinical psychology, Professor Ozawa talked about isolation or loneliness. And that actually is a national issue for Japan too. Japanese government started to take measures to kind of deal with it, and including set up some laws. And isolation is a kind of objective concept, referring to a state of no or little social connection or help. While loneliness is a subjective concept referring to the mental state of feeling alone, and something used to include the emotion of loneliness. And one of the therapy method of the therapy, there is I don't exclude any therapy. I just don't call I'm a therapist of this school. And one of the schools that a lot of people find valuable and effective is cognitive behavioral therapy. So kind of try to understand the individual people from perception, behavior, emotion, and body, and their interactions. So I here explain isolation and loneliness from cognitive behavioral therapy. Isolation is you're being alone, and it has to do with cognition. it's a physical thing. But loneliness is not only behavior plus cognition, but plus emotion, maybe. So according to Mr. Dr. Ogawa mentioned about the felt isolation. So it's a perceived thing, not only emotion, some somatic senses is involved in that. That's how I felt.
いろんな私も一応大学としてですね、アカデミアの中にいるんですけれども、あらゆることがですね、言語化されたり、認知的に理解されたり、表現されたり、説明されたりする。そういった世界にまみれています。で、それはとても重要なことですし、心地の良いことでもある部分もあります。でもそれはとても認識論によっていて、もしかしたら私たちはですね、そういうのを全部こうさっき AI とかですね、技術のお話もありましたが、何もかも言語的に測定する。例えば私は心理学なので、例えばその孤独感っていう尺度を使ったりしますね。
So sometimes we invent a measure of the loneliness. So my point of loneliness is a 10 or 30. That can be some expression. But is it something kind of useful to describe what is actually happening with us? And also, there is some consciousness of the subjectivity. That's my loneliness, my isolation. And there's also a question whether are you really conscious about that? You really aware of that? You feel some ambiguous loneliness. It's not coming into your awareness yet. So that's happened a lot. But we treat everything as measurable. So that's how the academia do the research. But it's a little bit different from our real experience of loneliness. So there's a limitation of current method. So in my clinical counseling scene, so people tend to use their mind a lot. I should be this way. I'm not that way, so that's not wrong. I should be doing this or that. So I ask them, do you want to do? Their answer is, I think I should do that. However, they try to do it, end up not being able to do it, and that led them to mental distress and have to take a leave from the job. So their distress started to be expressed in their physical aspect. Then people started to realize what is happening with me. So I think that people in the mental health industry know those examples a lot. So people notice something happening with them after they have some physical kind of phenomena, symptom. But until that, they don't recognize that has to do with their emotion or feeling. But until then, they have been avoiding look into deeper about themselves because there is a fear. If I started to look into myself deeper, I'll be broken out. So they started to avoid that, running away from that. So when I meet my clients, I set up a time or space that they can stop and pause and get in touch with themselves deeper and also create a relatedness, something foster that kind of pause and space. So our real experience has to do with a primitive physical sensation and a core of emotion. It's really necessary to get in touch with them. There's a lot of things happening with us which we cannot express in words. Yes, it's important to express in words, but also it needs to be respect that there's something you cannot express in words, or it's better not to express in words at this stage right now. So you can't express it in language, but it doesn't mean it doesn't exist. It's present. So it's important to know that. So I create a space. I really want to create a space that the people feel safe enough to start articulating it. And the other thing is community psychology. So think about things from the community point of view.
ここにもちゃんと謳ってあります。孤独・孤立は社会全体で対応しなければならない問題であって、そういう孤立・孤独を感じざるを得ない状
Loneliness
態に
and isolation are not a problem of the individual concerned, but the situation in which they are forced to feel lonely and isolated due to changes in the social environment. So I said I wanted to provide a space or place where clients feel comfortable. You know, our meetings are a part of community. Some people feel lonely, isolated, but in our one-on-one relationship with me and client, maybe that person may feel that I feel comfortable with this person. I don't need to really talk a lot. So I want to provide that kind of place. And another thing is I think prevention is important. So when you have symptoms already, it takes a lot of time and energy to recover. So if possible, because the stress can happen to anyone, the loneliness or distress that can happen to anyone, so maybe we should provide care during the early stage. So I totally agree with Dr. Ozawa's insight. So this is my last comment. So in the human relationship, as a counselor, I meet my clients, but from there, maybe it's good to meet with somebody, be with someone, and that if that expands, that's okay. But in some cases, some people do not want or cannot be in interaction with people in the physical environment. I don't want to push that to them. But what should people do if they don't have physical communities that they belong? I thought about it. So until this point, was that person never in a community? That cannot be the case. Some kind of community, the person was nurtured in some kind of community in the past. So if you think like that, maybe the person doesn't belong to physical community now, but at some point in the past, maybe that person belong to a physical community. Maybe that is like inside the memory and it's not something that you remember every day, but the person used to think I have nothing, but maybe the person had experience. In the person's history, maybe there was an experience where the person was in the community. You have this perspective, I may have that in the past, rather than thinking I never had that. So as Ozawa Sensei said, maybe the Naikan practice is a powerful way to remember that. Naikan practice tend to attract attention for its somewhat old-fashioned style because we use screens. But I believe that if something is effective, anything is good. So what happens in Naikan practice, a lot of things, we sit for 1 week for Naikan. So first, our life is in balance, our body is in balance, well organized, and I think it's very interesting that the Naikan therapy is sit alone in a very small space, so you are isolated, you feel lonely for some time, but at the same time, there are other people sitting together in the same open room, so you feel that kind of shared feeling. I'm struggling, I'm distressed, but maybe somebody else in this open space, somebody is going through this again, so I can do this. So that forms a sense of sort of a community or the kinship. You are told not to look at anybody else. You are alone, but you feel that maybe you are together with somebody in the space. So right now, in this moment, I have a real connection maybe. So the Nikon practice made you think or believe that. So that's something interesting about Nikon. Right now, I think there is nothing, but even in that time, maybe there may be something that exists in the field. I think that's something very interesting. So I think that leads to mindfulness. So Dr. Ozawa showed the picture of mandala. This is after 1 week, what I draw the picture, that mandala. After 1 week of practice, I draw the picture actually myself. So a specific somebody, like you look at your mother, for example, and the multiple others, like your mother and your father. And so you are looking from that perspective when you thought that you were alone, and then around me there are many people, and there are a lot of people who have supported me. So you begin to realize that you're not alone. So that leads to contemplative education. I think it's very important in clinical practice that rather than trying to grasp something that doesn't exist or just to be aware of something you already have. So if this practice makes you realize or be aware, no matter how it's called or what kind of education it's called, and I think Nikon is one of that, and mindfulness has that element as well. So maybe it's contemplative education. So I hope that one day we can have a discussion that's common among those practices. I think my time is up now, so I'm sorry for my talk, but that was my comments following the presentation of Dr. Ozawa. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Dr. Takahashi, Dr. Ozawa. We want to talk endlessly, so I want to make my comment very concise. So I am a body worker. I'm involved in the body and mind of modern people, and I practice physical and mental problems and occur. As a body worker, I'm involved with the body and mind of modern people. And I feel that Ozawa Sensei said the loneliness is a symptom, but a lot of problems occur from physiology of loneliness. We are mammals, we are social animals, so the isolation means death, really. So when you feel connection with other people, you feel secure, comfortable. It's not a cognition process, it's a somatic process. So the feeling of connection is felt. You feel comfortable and secure, and your freeze response will be melted, and you can be who you are. So the social isolation or mental isolation and separated from your own sensation. So you have this response, freeze response. So if you have that freeze response, you will feel more lonely. So you have this endless loop. So when I listen to you talk, why do we have a freeze response? And how can we relieve ourselves from freeze responses? I get many insights from your presentations. I've never experienced Nikon myself, but connection with myself or connection with my family, the other people, across different era, and connection with the past can be recovered. There are a lot of insights, to remember the past. It's really important that somebody actually listens to you. So the recovery of connections, including natural environments, that you fundamentally is not isolated, but something beyond yourself. Maybe you are something larger. So in order to feel you are part of something larger, we have to be open to our physical sensations. And we are closed. In this society, that's something I, as a body worker, can support. If you feel open and to remember there were connections through your physical sensations, so you can be relieved from the physiology of loneliness. That's how I felt.
So it's a limited time left, so I'd like to welcome the question or comments from the room.